following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case, and he is present and accounted for. Mr. Case, you have a wonderful guest for us this week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with Tony, so why don't you introduce everybody else, and then Tony and I will start our conversation.
Beautiful. Let me introduce our panel. David Hubler, author of The Gnats and Grays.
Good morning.
Okay. Ronnie Rabinovitz, who got rained out of Jackie Robinson Day today. He
Snowed out.
Snowed out, not
snowed
rained out.
Yeah.
Snowed out in April. That sounds
Yep.
like there may not be a climate change after all, but there may be. You
God.
never know. We got to keep an open mind to
I've
these
never
things.
seen anything like this.
In the whole country. In the whole country, we've had craziness.
The entire series with the White Sox was canceled. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay. Now, George Case, would you please introduce your guest?
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure to introduce Tony Siegle. I really am happy that Tony and I are able to spend a few minutes together talking both baseball and Trenton, New Jersey. And Tony is somebody that I've known about for many, many years. He's currently with the San Francisco Giants, but has spent many years, probably 25, 30 years with a lot of different ball clubs. And Tony graduated from Trenton High School in 1957, the year before I graduated. He and I knew a lot of the same people in Trenton. And this is going to be a fun time for me. And Tony, I really appreciate you coming on. I believe you're in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona right now. Is that correct?
That is correct. And may I say, George, it's 53 years in baseball.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
That's a lifetime, Tony. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it's no better way to spend it, I'll tell you that.
Well, I feel the same way, Tony. Tony, I feel the same way because I grew up in it with my dad, and baseball has been such a tremendous part of my life. And to have somebody like yourself with your great, major league experience with all the teams you were with, and I must tell you a quick little story before we really get talking. But last 2 weeks ago, we had Al Clark on. And as you know, Al was a longtime American League umpire from Trenton.
Right.
And he told us a tale that I had never heard before, that you were the guy who was responsible for doing the Astrodome scoreboard, telling the fans when to stand up, clap, holler, and all that kind of stuff. Now, is that a true story?
Well, that's where I started. I was in the Navy at the time. And they hired me part-time. I was the only part-timer in the Astrodome. And we worked the scoreboard. My job actually was the statistics and the home run spectacular. And at that time, that was quite a scoreboard. There weren't many like it.
Well, it's a fascinating story. And about 2 weeks ago, I also saw there's a show called Strange Inheritances, and they did a whole thing on Judge Hoffheinz and the Astrodome.
Oh, yes.
And his railroad car. Do you recall that?
The railroad car was never around when the Astrodome opened in 1965.
Oh, okay.
But Hoffheinz was some kind of powerful individual, I'll tell you that.
Well, I guess so, because then I guess after he opened up the Astrodome, he opened up this amusement park or something and put in this train and would had all the accommodations for the luxury of all the people that would come to visit the Astrodome. And Hoffheinz, I guess, was almost like larger than life, and he had all these great ideas, and he came up with the Astrodome, which when it was first put together, it was called the eighth wonder of the world.
And when the Astrodome opened, he was in partnership with a millionaire named R.E. Bob Smith. And when the dust settled 6 months later, Hoffheinz was the only guy in charge. So he was quite a dynamic individual.
Right. Now, your experience, how did you get that initially? I mean, I realize all the baseball experience you've had with the teams, but to move from I guess you had been in the Navy or something, and then all of a sudden you wound up in Houston, and how did that all start?
Well, I was stationed over in Japan with the landing craft outfit, and Vietnam was just heating up. So I had been over there 6 months, came back to San Diego, and I wrote a letter to the Bureau of Personnel asking for shore duty, so they sent me as Navy recruiter to Houston. When I got there in November of 1964, a fellow was in charge of officer programs, and at that time the Vietnam situation escalated, and all kinds of guys were calling for commissions and just get drafted for dicks or something. So when that happened, I wrote a letter to the Houston. Was asked, well, then they were called the 45s for a job. Not thinking anything further, a guy by the name of Fred Hopkins called me for a legal commission. The chief was sitting across from me, and he said, "Do you know who that was?" I said, "No." He said, "That's the son of Roy Hopkins of the Houston Colt 45s." So I got him back on the phone, and I said, "Freddie, by the way," and before I knew it, I was on the part-time crew of the Astrodome scoreboard, and that's how I started.
Well, that's really interesting. And then from there, you started to move into some front office jobs, I guess, with a lot of different Major League ball clubs. Is that right?
Well, when I got out of the service in '67, the Astros hired me, and Spec Richardson, who was the second of 24 general managers I've worked for, said to me, "We like you. I don't know what we're going to do with you, but we'll hire you." So I went to work for the Astros at $625 a month with a wife and 2 kids. But it was dying and going to heaven, believe me.
Well, you know what? You've had some wonderful experiences. I mean, I've been a part of baseball for a long time because of my dad, but for somebody like yourself to be so involved in the game for so many years, I mean, just wonderful. And so many people would love to have that kind of a position that you have. And right now, I think you're still in baseball, right? You're very active with the San Francisco Giants.
I am, sir, and trying to figure out how we can get some hitting. But when I did start, it was a different game, and I feel lucky, I guess that's the right word, to say that I was in baseball before the union, before Marvin Miller's resurgence, when it happened, the whole change in baseball, all the way through to today with the analytics. So I've gone through almost every phase of baseball as it exists today.
Well, you sure have. And I've got a question when you're talking about that, Tony. One of my favorite scenes in baseball movies, and I really don't like a lot of baseball movies because I
don't either.
They're not really well done, but I did enjoy Moneyball. And I did enjoy in particular the scene where they're talking with the baseball scouts. And I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are when you're talking about analytics. There's that conflict that goes on now between sabermetrics and old line baseball scouts and the thinking, because baseball scouts are looking at a player in a different light than what the sabermetrics are looking at. So I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm old school, George, and I believe in baseball scouts. Scouts go beyond the VORP and the WAR and all that kind of nonsense, and they look inside a kid. A good scout will look inside a player. I worked for a fellow named Bobby Maddock, who you might know or knew. Bob's no longer with us, but anyhow, he was as good a scout as there was. He signed Frank Robbins, Veda, people like that.
Right.
And when I started in Milwaukee, when I actually got into the baseball end of it in 1970, told me there's nothing that's more important in a player than me. And I never forgot that. Makeup being, what this kid really was made up about. Not how he hit or swung or threw a baseball, but what was his attitude when he got on the field? What kind of teammate was he? What kind of motivation did he have? That kind of stuff. And a scout provides that analytics never will ever be able to provide that.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, Tony. I agree with you. And I know my dad did some scouting, and I used to see some of his scouting reports. I mean, they do. They go into detail on the kid. I mean, they'll put some of the raw stuff in there, but they also talk about, you know, what the player has inside and what they produce.
That's right.
And the kind of
We
person
all
that
have
he
seen
is.
good players, or we have seen players with great ability, and we scratch our head and we say, why isn't he doing more for his team? Why isn't he doing more as a ball player? And that's the kind of thing that a scout will provide that puts you over the top as to whether to draft a kid or not.
Well, that's really good, and I really appreciate those comments. Ralph, do you have some questions that you wanted to ask Tony? I know the Giants are your favorite team, so, you know, jump in.
Well, they were my team growing up when I lived in New York, and they were the team that, with the Dodgers, kind of broke my heart a little bit when they moved out west. Little did I know at the time that in a few more years I'd be living out west due to the Air Force, and I spent my time out here. When I got out of the service, I stayed. So I've been a Giant apologist, a Met fan, and I just wanted to tell you that the hitting will gel. Pitchers are ahead of the hitters right now, Tony, so the Giants are going to be just fine.
Well, I won't argue with that, Ralph. I mean, we've got Longoria and McCutcheon now, and both of them are sputtering in the low 200s. Longoria got a couple of hits last night, so he's starting to come around. And I think typical when you get a real good player like that goes from an established team, it now all of a sudden he's starting with another one. He wants to try so hard, you know, he's like running in sand. But eventually they'll get on track. And don't forget, we lost Bumgarner, we lost Cueto, we lost Smarja, and we lost Melanson. Those are three starters and your closer, and that's pretty damn tough. And these kids have kept us in ball games. The Blocks and the Strattons have done a wonderful job. And when we start getting these other guys back and these guys start to hit, I think we'll be okay.
Hey, I wanted to use McCutcheon as an example of what's in a guy's heart when you're talking about scouting. Some of the things that he does are intangible. What he does in the clubhouse, the spirit of the game, all those things. You can't really quantify it, but it answers what you and George were talking about what's in the kid on the inside.
Without a doubt. And his teammates who they're together more than they are with their families. They're in the clubhouse at 3:00 for a night game, or some of them come in at noon and have lunch there. And they live with these guys, and they see how they act, and they see what they say, not just what they do on the field. That too. But eventually it catches on. And perhaps the best person to personify what you just said, Ron, that's Hunter's really struggling now. He's 35, and he's question of how much he has left. But that guy never stops going 100% and busting his backside.
Balls to the wall. Every game.
And it's genuine.
It's genuine, but it almost could be to his detriment if you stop to think about it, because you say, well, he is 35. If he would give in to playing out of his body a little bit, it may extend his career.
Well, that's possible, but I was focusing on what you said on the permutation of an attitude to teammates, and Hunter Pence is exhibit one of that.
Absolutely. You have a prospect coming up in the farm system, not to look, we're looking back, but you got to look ahead a little bit. Kid named Duger, who could be the center fielder of the future. Would you speak to him or of him?
Well, he had his not a trial. He had a bad year last year because he was injured a lot, and then he finally came to life in the fall league, which is, as you know, it's in September and October. And I think everybody wanted Duger to go to Sacramento and to get his 4 or 5 at-bats every day and to catch every fly ball that was out there. So when the time came, he could come up here and he'd be ready to play. We have Austin Jackson, who's been playing the majority of center field, and Gregor Blanco, who was my favorite reserve player of all time. But anyhow, we have those guys to cover until Duger is ready to play. I wouldn't be surprised if Duger's up here within a month or two anyhow. In the meantime, he's playing every day at Sacramento.
Before I throw it to the panel a little bit to talk to you, I just want to say, ask you if you were responsible for bringing Dusty Baker back in to the Giant fold at all, and how great that is for the organization.
Well, Dusty's an all-time favorite with all of us that ever knew the man because of his infectious likability. And I didn't have to do with him coming back. That was Harry Bear, who runs the club. And Dusty's a big favorite. I don't think there was anybody that objected to Dusty cut back in an advisory capacity and just be part of the club again. When he left, he sent a few salvos across our bow. But in baseball, we forget that stuff fast and remember the good things. And Dusty gave you enough to remember. So glad he's back.
I am too. And let me throw it open to David Hubler. How about you talk to Mr. Siegle about anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, okay. I was curious earlier on when you were talking about being, old school. You're preaching to the choir here with us.
Good.
We're all
old school. That's right. He sure is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, we're more than old school. We're just old. But the point is,
that's that too.
But what I was curious about was when you were talking along those lines, it seemed that you really favored a lot more than just the emphasis on statistics, which we have today. That was just one of the areas that you were not pleased with or in favor of. What were some of the other things that have changed over the years that you find, not really in the best interest of the game?
And my some of the things I can think of are, first of all, the teams were a lot. You had fewer teams, and therefore you had a bigger talent pool, so to speak. Nowadays, guys, we used to have 5 guys a year on the disabled list. Now we have 5 guys a week, and that's been a big change. The medical of the doctors are leery of malpractice, and of course the millions and millions of dollars of salary that are now involved. Doctors are more prone to put guys on the list and shut them down without even a thought. As years ago, we used to slap some tobacco juice on the shoulder and say, go out and pitch. I'm oversimplifying, but there was a big difference in that. The dollars have, like a lot of other things, corrupt things, and I think in our game, I think it's also corrupted us, and it's also made some bad decisions on the way because of money, and I think that pretty much sums it up. The game itself.
Tony, conversely, may I ask you what it is that you may like in the changes that you've seen over the years?
Well, I mean, at least through today, we haven't had change. I know there's been some MLB and Rob and stuff like that. I would be very, very upset if those things came to fruition. So the game, and I love I go to Chase Field all their home games, and they have a club, by the way, and watch the game. Okay. Thank goodness the game itself is still the same.
Okay. I would like to hear you and George, Tony, talk about Trenton and Trenton Connect, and if you would.
Well, can I say a few things about Trenton? First of all, Trenton, and Tony will bear me out. I mean, Trenton has always been a tremendous baseball town.
Yep.
Great youth leagues, great players coming up. My dad was one of them. Fortunately, was one of those players, Al Downing, who Tony knows very well. Al and I played high school basketball and baseball against each other. I think Tony was telling me a story about how, he was instrumental in getting Al from Milwaukee to L.A. or something like that. But anyhow, Al and I are very good friends, and Al Clark being an American League umpire from Trenton, Bo Belinsky from Trenton. So we all have a tremendous, affinity for Trenton baseball. Now, one thing I did want to mention, and maybe a lot of people are not aware of this, but you're talking about a pretty good center fielder. There was a guy named Willie Mays, and Willie Mays began his professional career in Birmingham on his way up to New York, but he stopped in Trenton for about 2 months, played for the Trenton Giants, which was a New York Giants farm club, before going to Minneapolis and then up to New York. So I know Tony would probably recall a few days of maybe watching baseball when he was a kid at Dunn Field in Trenton, and that's where, a lot of the professionals played baseball in Trenton for the first time. So, Tony and I could talk about Trenton baseball for a long time, but it's very near and dear to both of our hearts because we grew up in that area.
Tony, who did you root for as a kid?
And he's a Phillies fan as a kid, and a Yankee hater. And just amplifying what George said, we had 5 clubs within a 100-mile radius of Trenton. So basically, to say was it. It was because football was more than a pass to the baseball. Yeah. Baseball.
Okay.
Well, we were very fortunate where we were living with Tony and I in the Trenton area, and he's talking about, 5 major league clubs. We were in an area where we could get all the TV stations from New York and Philadelphia. So, we could watch the Phillies and the A's. We could watch the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Giants all from, our homes. And it was a very unique kind of coverage that we were very fortunate to be in an area midway between New York and Philadelphia, so we could watch, all the games, and it was a great way to really identify with a lot of those tremendous players over those years. And, you talk about baseball being the golden age or whatever, but, as Trenton people, Tony and I, we saw DiMaggio and Mantle and, Berra and Larson and Jackie and Gill and Duke and Pee Wee and all those guys. Right.
You mentioned the magic word, George.
Well, I did on purpose because I'd like to have Ronnie jump in there and talk about today is Jackie Robinson Day.
You're right
Hi, Tony.
on.
Yeah. Well, today is the Jackie Robinson Day. I was supposed to be on the field in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, we got snowed out. But I'll be watching the Dodger game. I'm a huge Dodger fan. Very disappointed in them so far this year. Don't know what's going on.
That's a taboo name, Dod. You can't say Dodgers in front of me.
I know.
Incidentally, fellas, I have a shirt that Mike Murphy, our esteemed ex-clubhouse guy, gave me, and it's the San Francisco Giants with 42 on the back that we always wear. And I have in my office
Isn't that great?
The few
That's
keepsakes I kept left.
Yeah. It's a great thing. It's a great honor for Jackie. It's a well-deserved honor. And everybody's wearing number 42 today. They say Babe Ruth changed baseball. Jackie Robinson changed America. And he did it alone. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. I was very fortunate to know him well. For many, many years, almost 20 years, we were friends until he passed away. And it's such a great thing for me to see him honored because he really was a tremendous, tremendous human being.
Tony, Ronnie's being a little bit modest. Ronnie and Jackie Robinson went back a long, long way. I think Jackie and Ronnie first became acquainted, when you were 10 years old, Ronnie?
I was 7 years old, yeah.
7 years old, right.
I met him in Milwaukee in 1953. I grew up in Sheboygan. and we became the dearest of friends. He was at my 10th birthday party singing happy birthday to me. He sent me a telegram when I graduated from high school. I have all these handwritten letters from him. And
I can't top that one. But I did meet him.
Did you meet him?
I met him.
Yeah.
I did. He was announcing for ABC, was it?
Yes, he was.
And he came to the Astrodome to do one of our games, and he was coming out of the radio booth, and I was walking down the catwalk, and I literally bumped into him, and I thought I was going to break into pieces. I was so intimidated and so frightened. I was just starting at the time. And I bumped it. That's the only time I ever had any contact with Jackie Robinson. Of course, we all grew up with him when I was 7 years old when he broke into the Montreal and then Brooklyn.
Sure. Yeah, he was a tremendous human being. A tremendous
Let me
athlete.
tell a quick story about running into Jackie as an adult. I had just gotten out of high school. I was selling insurance on a debit in Harlem, and the office I worked out of was on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. It was 2 doors down from the corporate offices of Chock full of Nuts. And on a regular basis, I would see Jackie maybe taking a cigarette break or hanging around talking to folks outside. And I'm a kid who had a lot of moxie. Still might. I could never go up to Jackie Robinson and say anything that didn't begin with I just talk about being intimidated. And this is as an adult, as a grown person. He had retired from baseball. He just had that aura about him, much like DiMaggio had. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, you know what, Ralph, what you're talking about, and I can appreciate that, with Jackie. He was a legendary player, but he was just a tremendous human being. And I think a lot of people, and Ronnie will bear this out, Tony will bear this out, ball players are human beings, and how they conduct themselves off the field to me, has always been just as important as what they do on the field. And Jackie was such a great credit to his race and racial relations in this country, and his business acumen and all the things he did for the community. I mean, just a tremendous person, and it is justifiable that he is being honored, every year, April 15th as Jackie Robinson Day. I think it's terrific for he and his family, and I've had a good opportunity over the years to meet his daughter Sharon, and who looks just like Jackie. I mean, I mentioned it before. I sat at a meeting one time and up in Major League Baseball headquarters, and Sharon came walking in the room, and I sat right next to her, and I said, Sharon, I'm stunned how much you look like your father. She said, well, thank you. She had the same gray hair. I mean, the full face, just a wonderful, wonderful young woman, and she's done an awful lot for Jackie's memory, as has Rachel.
And Rachel,
and she walks with pigeon toes as well.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does.
Yeah, Jackie used to dance down those baselines with his pigeon toe. Absolutely correct. My dad being a runner, that's one of the first things he would always say. He said, I look at somebody the way they run. If you're fast, you run pigeon toed, and that's what Jackie did.
Yeah, he sure did.
And don't forget, fellas, when he was with Brooklyn, he was traded to the Giants.
He was.
Quit.
That's right. That's right.
So
That's right.
I guess he felt the same way about the Giants as I do.
Terrible slap in the face.
Well,
slap in the face.
Does the name Dick Littlefield ring a familiar bell to you, Tony?
Yeah, it sure does.
Oh, yes.
He was the man who was traded for Jackie. They had to reverse that thing, and I wonder what it would have been like in a way, but looking back, to see him in another uniform would be like seeing Stan Musial
or Willie Mays.
Right.
Well, he made an immense uniform.
I remember how I felt when Julio Gauthier was traded. And,
oh boy, I knew him.
But
he practiced
from
voodoo.
Houston,
That's
right?
what I remember about him. He practiced voodoo, and he used to. When I had to do the bed checks for the Brewers, I used to have to open the door and let's make sure those guys were in their room. And he gets up out of his bed with that white face on, and scared the hell out of me. I've always remembered him.
So you were in
okay, that's what baseball is about. Looking back to some
that is right.
Anybody you can mention, there are memories that lead to other things. And Tony, would you come back and join us again soon and often?
It'd be my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Good.
There's nothing better I'd rather talk about than this.
That's terrific.
Tony, what are you doing with the
Giants?
Giants?
Send it, before we close out, I want to send it around the room a little bit and have everybody's thoughts completed. So, David Hubler.
No, I just wanted to know because Ronnie wanted to know more about what you were doing now. What do you do for the Giants now?
Well, right now I'm a senior advisor, so that's what they call you. You're 78 years old and you're had better days, but I used to do all the contract negotiations and the waiver rules, and early on I was one of the few that knew that stuff. The old-time general managers like Frank Lane, Frank Cash, and those guys, they didn't know those rules, so they had to have somebody like me and Mike Port, Walt Jocketty, guys like us, John Sherholtz. We all started together doing it in that role. Now I'm just in an advisory capacity, but I do go watch the Diamondbacks play, and our minor league facility is over here at the rehab center where our our Arizona Rookie League kids play and all that. So there's enough baseball around here to keep us busy.
May I ask you who your mentor was in baseball? If you had to pick one guy,
Tal Smith. That's easy.
Okay.
Tal Smith. I also had the privilege of working with Bill Giles, but Tal was the one that really got me started, and always was there to this day to listen and to talk and to counsel.
Okay. There was an ongoing thing in Baseball Digest, My Greatest Day in Baseball for players.
Huh.
What would, if I asked you, Tony, what was your greatest day in baseball as an executive?
There's two of them. One is when the day I started in the Astrodome in 1965, and when we won the World Series in 2010 was my first parade down Market Street, and I'll never forget it.
Beautiful. Okay, Ronnie Rabinovich, anything you'd like to close with?
Sure. Question mark. What's wrong with the Dodgers this year?
Whatever it is, I hope it continues.
In your eyes. In your eyes. You know so much about baseball.
Unwavering Giant fan, Tony. I love it.
Yeah. I really, what their problems are, I mean, you know, anybody could watch their team and played us a bunch of times here at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And you know, we beat Kershaw, Jansen, those two guys, and I think Kershaw arguably is the best pitcher in the National League. I think 2-1, something like that. I think they'll be, but you know, they seem discombobulated now, and I just hope they stay that way.
Yeah, they do. I agree with you.
It's too early. It's too early to
And I want to ask Ronnie, what's with Kelly, with the closer, Jansen?
Kenley Jansen?
I
don't know.
Is he hurt?
He's lost a little bit. I think he's hurt and he's not telling anybody about it. That's what I think.
Right.
But
well, he certainly hasn't said anything to me. And and he,
you know, after a while, that arm just has so many fastballs in it, fellas. So I don't care.
That's right. That's right.
And maybe it's catching up to him. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think Tony will agree that finding pitching and quantifying what a bullpen's going to be is the hardest job in baseball. And, teams go from year to year trying to build and rebuild the bullpen, and it's more difficult because starters are going fewer innings. And that's for another show.
Well, I
George,
give the Giants a lot of credit because, they picked up McCutchen, people like this that were going to help them. They're definitely going to help them.
Absolutely.
And, the Dodgers didn't do much of anything this year.
Well, as I tell you on Facebook all the time, when you bemoan a Dodger loss, Ronnie, I go, pity.
Well, yeah, hey, Ralph, Ronnie was, just last year, he was, we could barely talk to him. He was so excited about what was going on. Remember, Ronnie? They were running away and hiding.
That's right.
He's such a front runner, too. He never roots for the Dodgers if they're losing.
Oh.
Hey, this has been terrific. Tony promised to come back, and I'm going to hold him to his word.
Oh, yeah.
Come on the Giant Show with Michael Duca and I, and talk Giant baseball.
I know Michael.
Anytime. Pardon me?
May I just say something to close that first of all, it's a pleasure to meet, unquote, George Case. I did know his dad. I still have that glove in my garage that I bought at a sporting goods store, which was right up the street from where my dad's business was, Siegle Brothers.
Yeah, it was. Tony and I have talked about that before. Absolutely
right.
Correct. It was just a couple blocks away.
My love for baseball could never have happened if I didn't live in Trenton, New Jersey. And although Trenton right now is really going through some terrible times, when George and I were kids, it was a wonderful place to be. And
it sure was. Absolutely.
Because of the reasons we cited. So thank you, Trenton, and I'll never forget it.
Wow.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me, Tony, to talk to you. You and I have exchanged messages on Facebook so many times, and now we've had a chance to talk. So I'm looking forward to it. Yep. Well, thank you again for coming with us, and it's been very enjoyable for me.
My pleasure, sir.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay to hang up?
Okay, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The show is In Case You're Wondering with George, and we're over now. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Be well.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.